Good afternoon. It's Linda Barrett with Katiedid Wreaths, but today I'm not really coming here to demonstrate anything that's along my typical floral line that I do. I'm actually coming to you today representing Artful Shades, which was a name that I still go by when I am creating my lampshades, because I do still create and sew my own line of lampshades. And I wanted to kind of give you just a brief once over on kind of how they're constructed, how they're put together, and just brief. I don't want to take up too much of your time. I know that's not typically what I do. Most of the time I'm doing my florals, but as a floral artist and as a designer or artist, I think so many of us are into so many other things besides just making our florals. There's other things that we want to try, other things that we want to do. Like I see some of you doing the chalkboard. I'm not exactly sure what that is all about, but it has some really interesting designs with the chalkboard, that art. And let's see, what else have I seen some of you do? Mostly your florals. Oh, one of you also does the book, the folded book pages that spell things out on those book pages, which I think is really fascinating, and how you get those pages folded so it spells a word, on the edge of the book. And so I know I'm not the only one who has other creative outlets out there. I think that we all do. We're not just floral designers, floral artists. We're creators, we're creatives. So I think so often it's more about the designing and creating in whatever form. You can get it in your hands, and you can work on it and put something together that you're pleased with, but you just have that within you that says, I gotta make something, I gotta get a hold of something, and I want to create this beautiful piece of work. So one of mine's I like to sew, believe it or not, but so I sew my own lampshades. And what I do with these is that I get a wire form, which is what this one is. I'll set that aside. This is a wire form for the pumpkin lampshade, which, as you can see, pretty much looks like a pumpkin. And I think it has a beautiful shape, a beautiful design. There's lots that can be done with this, and lots that you can do. It just depends on your choice of fabrics. It depends on your choice of lace, your appliques, trims, beads, whatever you can imagine, you can put on this to make it how you want it to look. So the first thing that you have to do is, and I forgot to bring it over with me, is to wrap it with the seam binding, and which is how this one here is. It's already wrapped with the seam binding, and you just take it and you wrap it around each one of these struts, which is the support. So you wrap it around there over the whole shade, that form, the whole frame. And once you get that on here, you get that all wrapped on, then you have something that you can sew the fabric to. Because if you don't have that, you have no way of actually attaching the pieces of fabric that are going to go in here. So each negative space on this, here at the top, here down this side, each negative space in there is now going to end up being covered with fabric. And that you're going to first pin on and then hand sew on until you have all of the panels all covered with fabric. And Now that part I really enjoy doing. I can't stand. I really don't like doing the wrapping, but it's necessary. But it's kind of consuming work and tedious and boring. So I really don't like doing it, but it's quite necessary. On this particular frame, I already have the seam binding on it. I have already wrapped it. When you start it at the top, you oh, my husband found some seam binding for me. He picked a nice bright color too, so that's pretty cool. So you should be able to see it. Thank you, husband.
Yo.
Get this off of here. There we go. Okay, cut that off. But what you want to do, I know this might be a little bit harder for you to see, but you're going to start from the back side. You want to leave a little tail kind of hanging up there, and you're going to start around this first strut, and you're going to lay that tab down and kind of hold that in place, and then you're going to start wrapping the seam binding then around it, pulling it tight because you don't want this seam binding to come loose. And this gets, like I said, this gets a little bit difficult because you have all these other struts then that are in your way. I usually measure off a length of about 3 yards for each strut, and then go from there. So you're going to start wrapping this. And you see what I mean about how it gets a little tight, getting your fingers in there. And you're just going to keep going around. Rather, it's kind of like wrapping your flower stems with the floral tape. It's pretty much just like that. It's that kind of wrapping. Where you're overlapping it, you're not leaving a space in between. You want to overlap at the edge of it, and then you're just going to keep going and keep going all the way down until you have this whole thing wrapped with the seam binding. I know you probably can't really see this very well. You probably needed to be over my shoulder. But this is basically what I will do with every one of these struts in preparing this for working on, is to actually get this on. And so that's how it starts to look then. And you just keep wrapping it just like you do the floral tape when you're doing that to your florals and you're taping a stem. It's that same kind of wrap. You just want to make sure at the beginning that you have it anchored in place, because there's no way of anchoring that unless, without having that little tail and then wrapping your seam binding tape over the top of it so it's all locked into place. When you get down to the very last one, to the very bottom, and you're ready to cut that off, you need to wrap it in several directions so that you have that whole cross piece all covered with your seam binding. And then once you have that all covered the way you like it, you've got everything into place, you want to grab a hold of it kind of tight, pull it tight, and make sure you have your wrappings tight. And then you're going to stitch this in place. So you need a needle and thread. You're going to sew this down into place. Just take about 4 quick little stitches, and then cut your thread off. And then this will stay in place too. Cut off your tail close to that, because it's not going to show. It's generally on the underneath side, and nobody's going to see it unless they take the lampshade off and they're looking through it. But they won't see your workings that way. And that's what I do to get started. Then once I do, I have to measure each one of these negative spaces on here. So I have to measure the length of this, the whole length of that. So I usually use my measuring tape, and I'll start what I did on the last one of these that I made for a customer, I had a different fabric here than I had up here. So wherever you're going to start that fabric at, that's where you're going to lay your measuring tape. Then measure it and keep it all the way around on the shape of it. Don't deviate from that shape or you'll get the wrong length measurement. This is 13 inches. So this particular strap from here to here is 13 inches. And you want to add, let's say, anywhere from 1/2 to 1 inch to that measurement so that you have extra at the top and the bottom to pull, just snug your fabric just a little bit when you're pinning it on. Once you get those all sewn on, which you can see I've got these all pinned on, I have extra, little bit of extra material here at the bottom. I have extra material here on the sides. As you can see, that's actually the size of that space. So once I get this all stitched on, I'm going to cut that fabric off just as close to my stitching line as I can get without actually cutting the thread. Otherwise you're going to be resewing it, and that doesn't get to be fun. But that's basically all you have to do. And then when you do go to start pinning it, you want to make sure that you pull the fabric just a little tight, like so. When you go to insert your pins, you'll want to pull it down just a little. It does have a slight stretch to it, and you can just kind of pull it down a little. Take your pin and pin that in place. Picked up that tape. And that's all you're going to do with that. And then you'll cut that excess off. You'll go to the next panel, put the fabric on, pin it all in place, stitch it down, cut off the excess as close to the edge as you can get, and so on and so forth until you have all the panels covered with the fabric that you have chosen. Now on this particular shade, this is kind of an old-fashioned shade, as you can see. Kind of looks like, to me, it looks like a hot air balloon. That's what I keep thinking of every time I look at it. But it's very old-fashioned. But I want to give it a little more of an update. So I want to use some a little more modern fabric for it. And I chose, it's this Japanese kimono fabric, which they're only like in panels of about 18 inches wide, which is really pretty good for, you know, for most of my panels that I want. But I'm going to cut 2 of them for each one of these spaces in here. So I have a double layer of fabric, wrong side to wrong side, right sides out on both sides, front and back. And on this one, I chose a printed kimono fabric in the oranges and the greens and the golds. So that will go on my larger panels on the frame, and that will be stitched into place. And then I chose this other, and this is silk, by the way, this is silk fabric. And I chose this other silk. It's just tone on tone and a nice rust color that I thought complements this one, the printed one, very well. And on the smaller panels, then that's where I will have this one. So that should make a nice, I think, a more contemporary looking shade. Even though it's a very old design, it will still give it a very contemporary appeal. Simply, well, one thing because of the shape, because it's so unusual, and another thing because the fabrics that I chose, the pattern. It has flowers on it, and it also has birds. Every now and then you'll see this real pretty little bird in there, and I think I've got this one upside down. Let me turn this over. I want my birds going the same way. And that's another thing you want to keep an eye on, to make sure that any of your designs in your pattern, they go the right way from top to bottom. Okay, there, got that put back into place. So then, once I get all these small panels done, stitched on there, I'll start doing the larger panels and filling those in. And it's just simply a little whip stitch that you're going to do, and I can show you how that one goes. I do have, find my needle here real quick. Okay, I've got some, I think I'll use this white thread while I'm trying to show you. If I use the one that matches, you won't really be able to see it, so I'll just use a bit of this white. And I usually start at the bottom of this, find a spot at the bottom, and simply begin to sew. Make sure that you do get it into your seam binding fabric so that you're not sewing it to nothing. You want to make sure you do have that stitched into that seam binding, and you'll feel the needle kind of scrape across that metal strut. So I usually just do 2 or 3 quick stitches at the bottom. I don't tie the knots. I just stitch over it. It holds it into place, because once you get this panel all stitched on and you're going to do your trim, because you don't want this sewn edge all to show and the unevenness of the fabric once you cut off that edge of it, you don't want that to show, so you're going to have to use some kind of trim to cover all that up. So it's just basically give your fabric just a little bit of a pull so it's nice and smooth. Don't really pull hard on it. You don't really need to do that. You just want enough to make sure that your fabric is smooth. And your stitches don't have to be tiny. A lot of times mine are fairly, not tiny, but not real big either. So it's going to go along pretty much like this one. Just keep stitching it as you go around. When you get to a pin, take it out, stick it in your pin cushion. Another thing though too that you want to keep an eye on is the back side when you're stitching, so that you don't get this back piece of fabric all buckled up. Because they can show when you turn the lamp on. The light will shine through the fabric slightly, and you'll be able to see where that's all buckled or crimped, or you stitched a wrinkle into it. So you want to make sure that isn't smooth, so you don't see that when you turn on the lamp. So you just want to go ahead and hold, and this is also kind of hard, is holding this in your lap, because a lot of times I lose it and it rolls away. So you have to watch that, and the pins, and watch that you don't stitch yourself or poke yourself, which I do quite often. So that's just the hazards of the job. But then I'll just want to keep on stitching this until I have it all stitched into place. And when you are sewing, you also want to do a section of stitches. Like say you might want to do 6 or 7 stitches, and then you want to make another, right in the same spot you want to do another stitch. Like here, now I'm going to go through here again, right where I stitched, and do another stitch, which locks the stitches down. So if it should come loose, you're not going to have it all unraveled. It's only going to come to this one and it will stop, and these stitches then will stay, if that makes sense. That's kind of hard to explain, but every now and then you want to do just that quick little stitch, 1 or 2, and then continue on sewing, then make another little back stitch there and lock all those in place, and then keep going all the way around until you come back down here to the bottom. I think I pretty much explained everything. If I am going to use any kind of lace over the top of this, sometimes I'll use a net lace. It's just like the millinery netting, like the French netting from hats. Sometimes I will use that to go over the top of the fabric, just to give a different appeal, different look to it. Sometimes it really softens. Like if I use black, it will soften and dull down the color beneath it. If I've got it a little bright, I might want to do that. Other laces that can be used are embroidered laces. Really, any kind of lace that appeals to you, you can put on there. But I just always want to make sure that it's something that's actually going to complement my fabric that I have on there. If I don't see anything that I really like in the way of fabric that I want to use on a particular shade, it's not a particular print or design that I want to use, I can also get the silk, buy the silk in a plain white and dye it to whatever color I want to dye it to. And I'll usually do that in an ombre dyeing solution, so that I have it from the darkest will be at the bottom, the lightest will be at the top, and then it kind of changes color as it goes from the bottom real dark to the top real light, or I'll just change colors completely. Like maybe I'll do like a purple towards the bottom and maybe an eggplant color at the top, or even an olive green that I'll want it, so it goes from that darker purple all the way up into an olive green at the top. And that looks really pretty then when you turn the light on, because you kind of have to think about this being lit as well. And then once that's all on, you have everything on there that needs stitched into place, then you can put your trim on. And there are tons and tons of trims out there that you can get. Old ones, new ones, vintage ones, whatever you like. And you'll just and that's when you get the glue out. So I usually just use the tacky glue. But I will lay that trim over the top of it. I will glue that in place as I'm going down. And then just clip it off. Then once I have this whole piece done, I'll just clip it off. But then you want to make sure then that you also trim out the top of it. And then if there's, a definite bottom and a round circle like there is on this one, you'll also want to trim out this bottom piece there as well. And that pretty much describes the whole process to you. And the last thing you would do once you get the trim on there, you could put your appliques on. If you do have appliques that you have chosen for your piece, you can put those appliques on over the top of your trim, or however you want it on there. It could wrap the whole shade if you want. It can be on individual panels, which actually I did order some appliques from a site on Etsy. And I ordered 8 of them for these larger panels. So it's going to be these beautiful rust-colored roses that will be in these larger panels here for each one as it goes around. So once I get this one all done, I'll probably take some pictures of it for you, and you'll be able to see the whole completed process. But that's kind of a brief explanation on how you make these Victorian, they call them Victorian style. I think that they're just kind of bohemian is what I call them, because they have very unusual shapes to them. And there's a nice variety of shapes out there that you can work with. I mean, this is only 2 pieces and I have lots of other ones. So anyway, I thought I would explain that to you and what else I do besides my florals. I really enjoy doing the lampshades, and I really enjoy doing my florals. So thank you so much for watching my little demonstration here today. If you have any questions on it and about the process, or if you want to learn anything more on it, you can certainly look me up on Facebook. I have a business page on Facebook that's Katiedid Wreaths. And I also have a site on Etsy, Katiedid Wreaths, and you can locate me that way. And we can have conversation about that then. So thank you so much, and I hope that you have a good afternoon, the rest of your day, and the week's almost up. We're halfway there, so hang in there, and may God bless.